Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! As the night consumed the world, Luciano Moretti was abruptly yanked from his dreams by a buzzing intrusion. The early hours suffocated his groggy eyes as he reached for the luminescent invader. A fraudulent alert blared, its automated message piercing the darkness. His heart mirrored the phone's vibrations as he read the sinister notification. Unnatural purchases have been claimed under your identity. Detailed expenses emerged. One transaction in particular shone intrusively, a substantial expenditure on air travel. Confusion consumed his morning ritual. Subconsciously brushing his disheveled hair, Moretti struggled to make sense of the situation. After an extended wait, a robotic customer service agent, devoid of emotional labor, pronounced her analysis. It was now nearly 4 a.m, and he had to be at work in 4 hours. Can't we handle this over the phone? I'm afraid not, sir. Our fraud protection protocols require in-person verification for charges of this magnitude when they are in the cardholder's name. The good news is the ticket has been purchased for tomorrow afternoon. You can fly to New Orleans, visit our regional office there, and we'll have this sorted out. You want me to take the flight that was fraudulently purchased in my name to dispute the fraudulent purchase? The absurdity wasn't lost on him.
It's already paid for, sir,
the representative noted. And if you don't take the flight, you'll still be charged for it while we investigate,
which could take weeks. This way, you can resolve it immediately.
Luciano sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose.
Fine. Email me the details.
After ending the call, he flopped back onto his pillow and stared at the ceiling. He'd have to call his boss, explain this bizarre situation, and request emergency time off. At 34, with 10 years at the same accounting firm, he'd built up enough goodwill that it shouldn't be a problem, but it was still a headache he didn't need. By morning, the situation hadn't improved. The airline wouldn't transfer the ticket to another date without substantial fees, and his credit card company insisted the quickest resolution would come from taking the flight and handling matters in person. With reluctance, he packed a small carry-on bag with essentials for what should be a 2-day trip at most.
I'll be back by Friday,
he assured his boss over the phone while hurriedly tossing socks and underwear into his bag.
It's ridiculous, I know, but apparently this is the only way to avoid being stuck with a $2,000 charge.
The flight itself was uneventful, though Luciano couldn't shake the strange feeling of taking a journey that some unknown hacker had unintentionally gifted him. He arrived in New Orleans to unexpected chaos. The terminal buzzed with frustrated travelers, airport staff looking harried, and news crews setting up equipment.
What's happening?
He asked the woman seated next to him as they taxied to the gate. Luggage handlers strike, she replied, not looking up from her magazine. Started yesterday. They're not moving any checked bags. It's all over the news. Luciano felt a wave of relief that he'd only packed a carry-on. He made his way through the crowded terminal, past angry passengers arguing with overwhelmed customer service agents. Signs carried by picketers outside explained their grievances about working conditions and pay. After navigating through the airport chaos, he caught a cab to the hotel he'd hastily booked that morning. The driver was chatty, filling him in on the strike.
Gonna last at least a week, they say. Hotels are filling up with stranded folks. You're lucky you got a room.
The Bank of America regional office was closed by the time he arrived at his hotel. Tomorrow, he would straighten everything out and hopefully catch a flight home the following day. He settled into his room, ordered room service, and tried to relax. Morning brought the first real complication. While showering, Luciano slipped on the wet tile and instinctively grabbed the shower curtain to steady himself. The flimsy rod gave way, and he tumbled out of the tub, knocking over the complimentary toiletries, which spilled across his neatly folded clothes on the bathroom counter.
Perfect,
he muttered, surveying the damage. His only set of clothes was now soaked with an unholy mixture of shampoo, conditioner, and body wash. The hotel's laundry service could clean them, but it would take until evening. He wrapped himself in a towel and called the front desk about nearby clothing stores.
"You picked a bad time to need clothes, sir," the clerk informed him. "Most of the major retailers are short on stock because of the strike. Delivery trucks are respecting the picket lines."
"I just need something basic to wear to a business meeting," Luciano explained.
"There's a men's store about 6 blocks away, but they've been swamped with travelers in your situation."
"Oh, and there's a vintage boutique called Belle Époque just around the corner. They might have something." Thanking her, he hung up and contemplated his options. With his meeting at the bank in 2 hours, he didn't have time to search all over the city. A vintage boutique wasn't ideal, but it was close, and he just needed something presentable. Dressed in the hotel bathrobe, with his wallet in the pocket, he made his way to the street, earning strange looks from the hotel staff. The humid New Orleans air hit him immediately, making him regret this decision already. Belle Époque was a charming storefront with a display window featuring mannequins dressed in clothing from various decades. A bell jingled pleasantly as he entered, feeling immediately out of place in his bathrobe. The shop was empty except for a woman in her 60s, with silver hair styled in an elegant updo. She wore a vintage purple dress with a cinched waist that suggested the 1950s, and her eyebrows rose slightly at his appearance. "My goodness," she said, her southern accent thick as honey. "You look like you've had quite the morning." Luciano explained his predicament, conscious of how ridiculous he must appear.
"I just need something presentable for a business meeting.
Do you have any men's clothes?" The woman, Vivian, according to her name tag, pursed her lips. "I'm afraid we specialize in women's vintage fashion. The men's section is quite small and picked over. With the strike, we've had lots of desperate travelers coming through." She gestured to a tiny rack in the corner with 3 moth-eaten sweaters and a tweed jacket with patched elbows. "Nothing else nearby?"
"The men's store up the street has a line around the block. Been that way since the strike began."
She studied him thoughtfully. "What size are you? You're quite slim." Luciano told her, wondering where this was going. "You know," she said carefully, "we're having a sale on our 1950s collection. I have several items that might fit you. Women's clothing from that era was often structured in a way that's not terribly different from men's in certain styles." He stared at her, comprehension dawning.
"You want me to wear women's clothes to a business meeting at a bank?"
Vivian shrugged elegantly. "It's either that or your bathrobe, sugar. Besides, this is New Orleans. We've seen stranger things before breakfast." Luciano glanced at his watch. 90 minutes until his meeting, and he was standing in a vintage shop in a bathrobe. His options were limited. "What did you have in mind?" Vivian's face lit up. She moved through the racks with practiced efficiency, pulling out several items. "A simple A-line dress with a matching jacket would look professional. We can style it to be subdued." The idea was absurd, yet as she held up a conservative navy dress with a tailored jacket, he could almost see how it might work. The alternative was missing his meeting and spending another night in this city, waiting for his clothes to be cleaned. "I must be losing my mind," he muttered. "Fashion is about confidence," Vivian advised, guiding him toward a changing room. "And sometimes, necessity." What followed was a surreal, fitting session, with Vivian bringing various options while offering encouraging words. The first dress was too tight across his shoulders. The second made him look, in Vivian's diplomatic words, like a linebacker at a tea party. Then she brought in the emerald green swing dress. "This has more room in the bodice," she explained, passing it over the changing room door. "And the full skirt will balance your frame." Luciano slipped it over his head, surprised at how easily it went on. The fabric felt cool against his skin, the skirt swishing around his legs. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The dress's cut cleverly minimized his shoulders while accentuating his waist, which he'd never considered particularly narrow until now. "How is it?" Vivian called. He opened the door, feeling foolish. Her face broke into a wide smile. "My goodness, you were made for 1950s fashion. Let's accessorize properly." Before he could protest, he was seated at a vintage vanity while Vivian worked with frightening efficiency. She produced a brown wig styled in a classic bob, explaining that it would complete the look. Foundation covered his stubble, and subtle makeup, just enough to be presentable, dear, transformed his face. By the time she finished, Luciano hardly recognized the person in the mirror. The emerald dress with its white collar and cuffs, the petticoats creating the classic 1950s silhouette, the matching green heels, thankfully with modest height, and the styled brown wig created a convincing illusion. "What do you think?" Vivian asked, clearly proud of her work. "I look like—" He searched for words. "Audrey," Vivian supplied. "You look like an Audrey."
Hepburnesque, but with your own flair.
The name settled over him strangely, fitting the image in the mirror better than Luciano ever could. "I can't go to a bank looking like this," he protested weakly, even as he admired how put together he appeared. "Why not? You look professional, elegant, and appropriate, better than anyone in a bathrobe." She checked her watch. "And you have 30 minutes to make your meeting." Seeing no alternative, he paid for the outfit, wincing slightly at the cost, though the sale helped, and found himself walking down the streets of the French Quarter dressed as a woman from another era. The strangest part wasn't the clothes themselves, but how quickly he adapted to them. The heels were challenging at first, but he found his rhythm after a block. The petticoats made sitting an adventure, requiring a specific technique Vivian had demonstrated. Yet there was something undeniably pleasant about the swish of the skirt around his legs, the way the fabric moved with him. At the bank, he approached the reception desk with his heart pounding.
"I have an appointment regarding fraudulent charges. The name is Luciano Moretti."
The receptionist glanced up, her expression professionally neutral. "Of course. ID, please." He handed over his driver's license, bracing for questions. She looked at the ID, then at him, and smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Moretti. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." He didn't correct her, relieved to avoid explanation. When the fraud specialist called him in, he presented his case and documentation. The woman, Denise, according to her nameplate, was all business. "Yes, we have the report here. Someone compromised your card information and made several purchases, including this flight. We'll reverse the charges and issue a new card." She typed efficiently on her computer. "Unfortunately, due to the strike affecting deliveries, we can't get a replacement card to you immediately. It will take about a week." "A week? I need to get home sooner than that." "You can fly back without issue using your ID, but you won't have access to your credit line until the new card arrives. We can expedite a temporary card to your hotel in 3 business days." Luciano, or Audrey, as he was now apparently presenting, calculated the logistics. 3 business days plus the weekend meant nearly a week in New Orleans with limited funds and 1 outfit. Is there any way to speed this up?
I'm afraid not. The strike has complicated everything.
Denise gave him a sympathetic look. The airline should accommodate a change to your return flight once the fraud report is processed. That will take 48 hours. He left the bank with mixed feelings. The fraud would be handled, but he was effectively stranded in New Orleans for several days with nothing but an emerald swing dress and petticoats. At least the hotel had already been charged to his card before it was canceled. Back at Belle Epoque, Vivienne wasn't surprised to see him return. "How did it go?" she asked, arranging a display of vintage hats. "They're fixing the fraud, but I'm stuck here for a week. I need more clothes." He gestured at his emerald dress.
"Apparently I'm Audrey now."
Vivienne clapped her hands together. "Excellent! Let's build you a proper wardrobe." What followed was an education in vintage women's fashion. Vivienne pulled together a collection of day dresses, a smart suit for business matters, loungewear for the hotel, and accessories to complement each piece. She taught him how to apply makeup, style the wig, and carry himself with the grace expected of a lady in the 1950s. "Posture is everything," she instructed, placing a book on his head. "Imagine a string pulling you up from the crown of your head." By evening, Audrey, as he found himself thinking of this new persona, had a hotel room filled with vintage clothing and a crash course in feminine presentation. The woman who looked back from the mirror bore little resemblance to the accountant who had reluctantly boarded a plane yesterday.
"I feel like I'm in a play,"
he confessed to Vivienne over dinner. She had invited him to join her after closing the shop, taking him to a small restaurant in the quarter where the waitstaff greeted her by name. "Life is a performance, dear," she replied, sipping her wine. "We all play roles. Some feel more authentic than others." The next morning, Audrey dressed in a pale blue day dress with white trim, styling the brown wig as Vivienne had taught her. The routine already felt familiar: foundation to cover stubble, powder to set it, a touch of mascara and lipstick. She practiced walking around the hotel room, finding the rhythm of the heels more natural with each hour. When her phone rang, it was the bank with an update. "Mr. Moretti, we've processed your fraud claim. The airline has been notified, and you can reschedule your return flight for next Thursday without penalty." "Thursday?" "That's a week away." Audrey kept her voice steady, conscious of how her tone affected her presentation. "It's the earliest available due to the backlog from the strike. Your temporary card will be delivered to your hotel by Tuesday." After hanging up, Audrey sat on the edge of the bed, considering her situation. A week living as a woman in New Orleans hadn't been on her agenda, but there was something liberating about being away from her normal life, exploring this new identity. She called her boss to explain the delay, crafting a simplified version of events that omitted her current appearance. "The strike has everything backed up. I should be back next Friday."
"Take the time you need,"
her boss replied. "Consider it a forced vacation. God knows you've accumulated enough unused days." With that concern addressed, Audrey decided to embrace the situation. She would be in New Orleans for a week as Audrey. Why not make the most of it? The city opened itself to her in unexpected ways. Where Luciano might have attracted caution as a solo male traveler, Audrey was welcomed with the warmth New Orleans reserved for its visitors. Shop owners chatted amiably, restaurant hosts offered prime tables, and fellow tourists included her in conversations. She spent mornings exploring the French Quarter, afternoons reading in cafe courtyards, and evenings listening to jazz in venues where the music spilled onto the streets. Each day, she grew more comfortable in her new identity, finding it less a disguise and more an expression of something that had perhaps always existed beneath the surface. Vivian became both friend and mentor, teaching her the history behind the clothes she wore. "These weren't just fashions," she explained, adjusting the collar on a rose-patterned dress Audrey had purchased. "They were statements about femininity, about the changing role of women after the war." On her 4th day in the city, while wearing a sunny yellow dress with a matching cardigan, Audrey was photographed by a local blogger documenting street fashion. "Your vintage style is amazing!" the young woman gushed. "So authentic! Do you mind if I feature you on my Instagram?" Audrey hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The likelihood of anyone from her regular life seeing it seemed remote, and there was a thrill in being admired for this new self she was creating. The following day, Vivian called her excitedly. "You've got to come to the shop! That blog post about you has gone viral in the vintage community. I've had a dozen customers asking about the lady in the yellow dress and where they can find similar styles." At the boutique, Audrey found herself surrounded by women eager to learn about vintage fashion. Without planning to, she began explaining the details of the clothing, knowledge absorbed from hours of Vivian's tutelage. Her background in accounting made discussing fabric costs and value retention second nature. "You have a gift for this," Vivian observed later, after the impromptu session had ended with several sales. "You understand both the aesthetic and the business aspects." That evening, over beignets and coffee, Vivian made an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking of expanding the shop, opening a second location focusing specifically on 1950s fashion. Would you be interested in partnering with me?" Audrey nearly choked on her coffee. "Me? But I'm going back to Chicago next week. To my job, my life." Vivian patted her hand. "Just something to consider. You seem more at home in that dress than many women I've known for years, and you clearly have a passion for this world." The conversation left Audrey thoughtful. Returned to Chicago as Luciano, to his efficient but sterile apartment and the accounting job that had once seemed fulfilling but now felt restrictive, or stay in New Orleans as Audrey, building something new around a passion that had awakened unexpectedly. Tuesday brought the replacement credit card, and with it, financial autonomy again. Audrey celebrated by taking Vivian to dinner at one of the quarter's finest restaurants, both women dressed in their vintage best, Audrey in a black cocktail dress that Vivian swore could have been worn by Audrey Hepburn herself. "I've been thinking about your offer," Audrey said, as they enjoyed their dessert. "What would this partnership actually look like?" Vivian's eyes sparkled. "I own the building next to the shop. It's been storage for years, but with some renovation, it would make a perfect extension. You have the business acumen I lack, and I've watched you develop a genuine eye for the fashion. But I don't have retail experience." "Experience can be gained. Passion can't be taught." Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, does the idea of going back to your old life fill you with excitement?" Audrey considered the question. The thought of returning to Chicago, of putting Luciano's clothes back on, felt increasingly like stepping into a costume rather than coming home. "I need to think about it," she finally said. That night, alone in her hotel room, Audrey called her best friend from Chicago, David, who knew nothing of her current situation. "Hey, need some advice?" she began, consciously shifting her voice back to Luciano's register. "What would you say if I told you I was thinking about quitting my job and moving to New Orleans to open a vintage clothing store?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Is this some kind of midlife crisis?" David finally asked. You've never mentioned interest in fashion or retail before.
People change, discover new passions. This is about more than clothes, isn't it?
David's perception had always been sharp.
You've sounded different this whole trip. More, I don't know, alive?
Audrey took a deep breath. What if I told you I've been living as a woman while I've been here? Another long pause.
Are you serious?
Completely.
Huh.
The lack of judgment in his voice was encouraging.
Actually, that explains a lot about you over the years. The way you've always seemed held back somehow.
They talked for hours, David asking thoughtful questions without pushing. By the end of the call, Audrey felt clarity settling over her decision, like the perfect fit of a well-tailored dress. The next morning, she called her boss in Chicago and formally resigned, arranging for her final paycheck to be deposited directly. She contacted her landlord about breaking the lease, willing to pay the penalty. David agreed to pack up her essential personal items and ship them. When she walked into Belle Epoque later that day, wearing a forest green pencil skirt and white blouse, Vivian took one look at her face and smiled. You're staying?
I'm staying,
Audrey confirmed, as your business partner and as Audrey. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. They secured a small business loan to renovate the adjacent building, with Audrey's financial background proving invaluable in creating a business plan that impressed the bank. They developed a concept for Audrey's Atelier, a boutique specializing in authentic reproductions of 1950s fashion for modern women who appreciated the style but needed contemporary sizing and practicality. Audrey found a small apartment above an antique bookstore just a block from the shop, decorating it with vintage pieces that matched her evolving aesthetic. She legally changed her name to Audrey Moretti, embracing her new identity fully. The brown wig eventually gave way to her own hair as she grew it out, styling it in the same classic bob that had first transformed her appearance. Her confidence grew with each passing day, her movements becoming naturally feminine as she inhabited her authentic self. 6 months after that fateful credit card fraud, Audrey's Atelier opened its doors next to Belle Epoque. The grand opening attracted vintage enthusiasts from across the South, many of whom had followed the lady in the yellow dress on social media. As Audrey cut the ribbon, wearing a custom-made emerald swing dress reminiscent of the first one she had ever purchased, she caught Vivian's eye across the crowd.
"Thank you," she mouthed, silently.
Vivian merely winked, raising her champagne glass in a toast to new beginnings. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the cleanup was complete, Audrey stood alone in her new shop. Surrounded by the fashions that had unexpectedly changed her life, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. A fraudulent plane ticket, a luggage handler strike, a ruined set of clothes. What had seemed like disasters had actually been stepping stones toward her true self. She ran her hand over the emerald fabric of her dress, remembering the moment she had first looked in the mirror and seen Audrey looking back. Not a disguise, not a temporary solution, but the person she was always meant to be. Outside, the sounds of the French Quarter created their familiar symphony. Jazz music, laughter, the clip of hooves from passing carriages. New Orleans, with its celebration of the authentic self, regardless of convention, had become home in a way Chicago never had. Audrey turned off the lights and locked the door, stepping out into the warm evening air. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to share her passion for the elegance of another era. For the first time in her life, She wasn't playing a role or meeting expectations. She was simply being Audrey, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!